Imagine a weapon so bizarre, so unexpected, that it didn't just change the outcome of a single battle. It warped the entire course of history. Not the swords and arrows you're picturing. I'm talking about dead animals catapulted over city walls, ships that set the sea itself on fire, and ancient death rays said to harness the power of the sun. Sounds like something out of a fever dream, right? But these weren't myths. These were real weapons, designed by desperate people in desperate times, that tipped the balance of empires, and some were so terrifying that history itself tried to erase them. So grab your owl feathers and settle in, because today on History Owl, we're diving into the strangest arsenal ever assembled, the bizarre weapons that changed history forever. Let's start with something truly revolting. Picture a medieval city under siege. The defenders are hungry, terrified, and cut off from the outside world. Suddenly, over the city walls comes a rain of rotting, diseased corpses. This wasn't just psychological warfare. It was biological warfare, centuries before anyone knew what a microbe was. The Mongols used this tactic at the siege of Kaffa in 1346, hurling plague-infected bodies into the city with their catapults. The result? It's believed this may have helped spark the Black Death in Europe, one of the deadliest pandemics in human history. Imagine the sheer horror. Not only are you fighting an enemy outside your walls, but the enemy is now inside, invisible, and lethal. The Mongols probably had no idea about bacteria, but they knew terror was a weapon in itself. But the Mongols weren't the only ones who understood the power of the grotesque. In ancient Rome, defenders sometimes threw wasp nests or even pots filled with venomous snakes at attacking soldiers. There's even a story of the Greek general Hannibal, yes, the guy with the elephants, using clay pots full of snakes as improvised projectiles during naval battles. You're expecting arrows and fire, and instead, the enemy ship explodes into a writhing mess of panic and venom. It's hard to keep your formation when you're being attacked by a swarm of snakes. Now, if you think that's wild, wait until you hear about the ancient death ray. Legend has it that during the siege of Syracuse in 214 BCE, the great mathematician Archimedes constructed a device using mirrors to focus sunlight and set Roman ships ablaze. Sounds like pure sci-fi, right? Historians are still debating whether it actually worked, but the myth alone was enough to terrify would-be attackers for centuries. Whether it was real or not, the idea that a single mind could summon the sun as a weapon was enough to shift the balance of power, even if just through fear. Let's move from sunlight to fire. Enter the Greeks and their terrifying weapon, Greek fire. More than just burning oil, this was the napalm of the ancient world. It could stick to ships, to armor, even to water itself, burning with a fury that couldn't be extinguished by normal means. The exact recipe was a closely guarded state secret, lost to history, but its impact was unforgettable. During the Arab sieges of Constantinople in the 7th and 8th centuries, Greek fire turned the tides more than once. Imagine being a sailor in the Byzantine navy, watching enemy ships go up like torches, the sea itself a wall of flame. No wonder the Byzantines guarded the formula like their lives depended on it, because they did. But human ingenuity isn't always about destruction, sometimes it's about deception. Consider the Trojan horse. It's the ultimate example of psychological warfare, a weapon, if you can call it that, made not of steel but of stories and trust. The Greeks, unable to breach Troy's walls after 10 years of siege, pretended to give up and left behind a giant wooden horse as an offering. Inside, hidden soldiers waited for nightfall. The Trojans wheeled the horse into their city, and the rest is legend. What's fascinating here is that the Trojan horse, whether fact or myth, represents a shift in thinking. Winning isn't just about brute force, but about outsmarting your enemy. Sometimes, the most powerful weapon is the one you don't see coming. Speaking of psychological warfare, let's talk about the Aztecs and their obsidian-bladed maquawheel. The maquawheel looked like a wooden club, but its edges were lined with razor-sharp obsidian shards, volcanic glass that could slice clean through flesh and bone. Spanish conquistadors wrote in horror about the wounds these weapons inflicted, describing limbs being severed with a single blow. Steel armor could sometimes stop the blades, but the psychological impact was devastating. Imagine facing an enemy whose weapons could make you bleed out in seconds, whose warriors wore jaguar pelts and howled like wild animals. No wonder the Spanish chroniclers were so quick to demonize the weapons, and the people who wielded them. Let's hop forward a few centuries, to the age of gunpowder, and the emergence of the world's first true landmines. The Chinese, always ahead of their time, were experimenting with gunpowder bombs as early as the 13th century. But it wasn't until the Ming dynasty that they started burying, ground thunder, bombs in the earth to explode under enemy feet. Imagine marching into battle, thinking you're on solid ground, only for the earth itself to erupt beneath you. It's an entirely new form of warfare, one where the battlefield itself becomes the enemy. And it's a legacy that's still with us today, in ways both tragic and terrifying. But if we're talking about bizarre, we can't ignore the war pigs and war elephants of the ancient world. Elephants were the tanks of their day, massive, unstoppable, terrifying. But what happens when your enemy turns the animal kingdom against you? At the Battle of Gaugamela, Alexander the Great reportedly used squealing pigs to frighten off Persian war elephants. The noise drove the elephants into a panic, turning them back against their own lines. The lesson? Sometimes the simplest solutions are the most effective and the most bizarre. Now, for a weapon that's both bizarre and beautiful, the chakram. This razor-sharp throwing disc was used by Sikh warriors in India, and it wasn't just for show. Thrown with a flick of the wrist, the chakram could slice through enemy armor at a distance. Imagine facing a foe who could decapitate you from across the battlefield with a flying ring. It's the kind of weapon that seems almost too strange to be real, but there are countless records of its use, both in battle and in acrobatic displays of skill. Let's not forget the ancient world's answer to the tank, the siege tower. These massive wooden structures rolled up to the walls of cities, allowing soldiers to storm over the top. But some were equipped with battering rams, drawbridges, and even giant grappling hooks. And then there were the really creative ones, like the Helepolis, or taker of cities, built by the Greeks at the siege of Rhodes. This monster was over 130 feet tall, covered in iron plates, and bristling with catapults and ballistae. The defenders eventually managed to destroy it, but not before it became the stuff of legend. The lesson? Human ingenuity will stop at nothing. Not even the laws of physics, when it comes to breaking down walls. And if you think bizarre weapons are a thing of the distant past, think again. In World War II, British engineers developed the Great Panjandrum, a massive, rocket-propelled wheel filled with explosives, designed to roll up the beaches of Normandy and blow holes in German defenses. The problem? It was completely uncontrollable, often veering off course and threatening its own operators. In one famous demonstration, the Panjandrum broke free and charged straight at a group of military brass and journalists, scattering them in panic. It never saw combat, but it stands as a monument to the strange lengths people will go to win a war. And then there's the humble pigeon. In both world wars, pigeons were used to carry messages across enemy lines, often dodging bullets and hawks to deliver vital intelligence. But it gets weirder. In World War II, American psychologist B.F. Skinner designed a plan to train pigeons to guide bombs. The birds would peck at images of targets on a screen, steering the bomb in real time. It sounds insane, but early tests were surprisingly effective. The military eventually scrapped the idea in favor of electronic guidance, but for a moment, the fate of the world hung on the wings of a pigeon. Let's take a step back for a moment. What do all these weapons have in common? They're not just tools of destruction. They're products of imagination, desperation, and a willingness to bend the rules of what's possible. When the stakes are high enough, humans will try anything, no matter how strange, to survive and win. Consider the hellburners of the 16th century, a weapon so explosive, it was described as the ancestor of the modern naval mine. During the siege of Antwerp in 1585, Dutch rebels loaded ships with massive gunpowder charges, disguised them as harmless supply vessels, and floated them into the Spanish fleet. When the hellburners detonated, the resulting explosions were so powerful that they blew ships out of the water and killed hundreds in seconds. The psychological effect was just as devastating. Soldiers began to fear the river itself. The Dutch didn't just fight with swords and muskets. They fought with terror, with surprise, and with fire. But sometimes, the most bizarre weapons are the ones that never quite make it off the drawing board. Leonardo da Vinci, the original Renaissance man, designed everything from armored vehicles to giant crossbows capable of firing massive bolts across a battlefield. Most of these never saw actual combat, but the very act of imagining them changed the way people thought about war. Leonardo's notebooks are filled with sketches of mechanical knights, scythed chariots, and even a kind of early machine gun. It's a reminder that the most powerful weapon might just be the human mind. Let's not forget about psychological weapons. The Mongols, again, were masters of this. They'd send advanced scouts to spread wild rumors about their numbers and cruelty, convincing cities to surrender without a fight. Sometimes, the mere threat of a bizarre weapon, real or imagined, was enough to bring entire kingdoms to their knees. And then there are the weapons that turned against their creators. The British wind cannon of World War II was meant to shoot a blast of compressed air strong enough to knock planes out of the sky. In reality, it was barely strong enough to knock over a scarecrow. The Nazis themselves experimented with sun guns, giant mirrors in orbit meant to fry enemy cities from space. Thankfully, the technology never got off the ground, but the fact that people even tried shows just how far the imagination can go when pushed to the brink. But it's not all doom and gloom. Some bizarre weapons ended up saving lives, at least in a roundabout way. In World War I, the British developed tanks, not just to break enemy lines, but to protect soldiers from machine gun fire. The first tanks were slow, clumsy, and often broke down, but they changed the face of warfare forever. Suddenly, the battlefield was no longer a place of static slaughter, but a dynamic, moving puzzle. The tank began as a bizarre experiment, and became a symbol of a new era. History is full of these moments, times when desperation, creativity, and madness collided to create something new. From the plague-ridden corpses at Kaffa to the Greek fire on the Bosphorus, from the obsidian blades of the Aztecs to the metal monsters of World War II, the story of bizarre weapons is the story of human ingenuity, for better or worse. Every time we think we've seen it all, someone, somewhere, comes up with something stranger. So, what does this all mean for us today? Maybe it's a reminder that history isn't just shaped by kings and generals, but by the weird and wonderful inventions we dream up in our darkest hours. Sometimes, it's the strangest ideas that end up changing the world. If you enjoyed this journey through history's weirdest arsenal, be sure to subscribe to History Owl for more stories that reveal the hidden, the bizarre, and the forgotten sides of our past. And let us know in the comments, what's the strangest weapon you've ever heard of? Thanks for watching, and remember, in history, the truth is always stranger than fiction.